So we never really learned to talk much about ideas or feelings, but we had to talk about something. So, we would often talk about the food.
I'm Dalia Colón, and this is The Zest. Citrus, seafood, Spanish flavor, and Southern charm. The Zest celebrates cuisine and community in the Sunshine State. Today, he's a foodie favorite, Splendid Table host Francis Lam. Quick reminder that we're working on our Ask Us Anything episode. So that might be questions you have around food, the restaurant scene in Florida, maybe podcasting questions, or anything else, literally anything else that's on your mind. Send your questions to info@thezestpodcast.com. Now, today's guest is somebody that I have 1,000 questions for. I hear him in my car on the radio every Sunday afternoon. He keeps me company. And you probably know him too. All right, Francis Lam is a food writer, cookbook author, and host of the popular, dare I say iconic, public radio program, The Splendid Table. On June 1st, he'll be at the new Tampa Performing Arts Center for a sold out live taping of the show. So if you don't have tickets, you're going to have to wait for the broadcast, but it's going to be a great time either way. Now, ahead of his visit to Florida, Francis chatted with me from his hometown of New York City, where he lives and works. In our conversation, he shared how his Chinese-American upbringing helped him learn how to talk about food on the radio. Think about that. Cooking is one thing, talking about food, whole other thing. He also shared the Florida foods he's most excited to try and his dream Splendid Table guest, a name that surprised me and I bet will surprise you too. So here's my conversation with Francis Lam.
My name is Francis Lam, and I'm the host of The Splendid Table.
Yay! We love The Splendid Table. I think everybody, I don't know if people feel like they know you, but I take you in my car. So I'm like, oh, that's Francis. He comes with me to drop off my daughter at volleyball practice.
Oh, yeah, he's just like chilling in the backseat.
Yeah, too funny. Okay, so you're coming to the new Tampa Performing Arts Center on June 1st, and I believe the tickets are sold out or pretty close to sold out. So those of you who don't have tickets, I'm sorry, but you'll just have to wait for the live broadcast. But for those of us who are attending, tell me, what is the difference between the live recording and the final product that we hear on the radio?
Oh God, we sound so much better in the edited version. We have a genius editor named Jenny Luvier who makes us all sound incredible. No, in all seriousness though, like we do pride ourselves in keeping ourselves pretty true to the recording, both in our live shows and really in our taped interviews with guests. I mean, we think of ourselves as a place where people want to come and they want to tell their story. And, we want to encourage people to speak from the heart and speak from what they know and speak to their expertise. And we really try to let that sort of shine on its own. We're not a heavily edited show. We pride ourselves on being human. And that's one of the things I always tell our live audiences, actually, when we do record live, like, hey, you're here to listen to a live recording and not a live show. And by that, the distinction I mean is you're going to see us make mistakes. We're not professional orators, here to, wow you with our amazing speeches. Like you're going to hear us talk to each other. You're going to hear us flub our lines maybe a little. And oh my God, I totally didn't mean it that way. Let me try it this way. And we do edit that out some, of course, just to make sure our guests feel comfortable, they feel like, they're representing their own best selves. But yeah, that's a little bit of the difference. The difference is you do hear the little bit of stuff we edit out. But also like it's we've done a number of these live shows and the energy is just great. It's just wonderful being in these rooms and to hear people. You can hear people listen. It sounds like a crazy thing to say, but you can absolutely hear people listen in the sense that you see their reactions, you feel their body language. There's so many ways that you can show people you're listening when they're like locked into what you're saying. People paid money to be there, so they're usually not there on their phones.
So right. I love that. Okay, but sometimes when I'm listening to a live recording of a radio show, not the Splendid Table, but I will have a little bit of FOMO because they are having so much fun in the live setting. And I feel like, but what about the rest of us? What about the thousands of us that are listening? And you do this so well. We had a question. I told people on social media that I'd be talking to you, and everybody like lost their minds and had a million questions for you. Lauren Jackson is the food editor at Sarasota Magazine, and she wants to know what tips you have for keeping food interesting in a listening format. And this is something we obviously deal with on the Zest as well, but you guys do it so well. So what are the things you're thinking about so that everybody feels a part of what you're doing, even though they're not eating anything? And you're probably not eating anything either.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, it's a really great question. And honestly, like going back, so this is our 30th anniversary as a show, right? I was not there all 30 years, certainly. For the first 22 years of it, it was hosted by Lynn Rossetto Kasper, who was one of the founders of the show. And, I think at first, like they had trouble getting the show on the air because folks were like, what does that mean? Like, what are you going to talk about food? It's like dancing about architecture, right? Like, what does that mean? Well, she had such a wonderful way of being where like you just loved to be in her presence. You loved hearing her talk. Again, she was such a great listener. You could hear her listen. But I think for us, at least the way I try to do it, yes, the best thing about food is tasting it, smelling it, seeing it. But really right up there with it is knowing about it and learning about it and understanding how people connect to it. And for me, it's a show about food, but really it's a show about people. And that's something I carried through my whole career. Before I was the host of the Splendid Table, I was a writer for many years, a food writer for magazines and newspapers. And I also actually am an editor, a book editor as well. The thing I've always said is like, I eat food because I love food, and I cook food because I love food, but I talk about food because I love people. And it's really about having that act of conversation and that act of connection and giving and receiving the sharing of stories when you feel like someone's really sharing something that's a part of themselves. And that's a magical experience to be a part of for me as an interviewer, as a conversation partner. And I hope that it comes through in the show.
Oh, 100%. That's beautiful. And you're right. Food is about so much more than just food. We learned this during COVID because when we started the Zest podcast, it was a lot of like, let's go figure out how to make a Cuban sandwich and let's watch this guy make pizza. But then suddenly I'm sitting in my bedroom closet interviewing people on Zoom and we can't do any of those things. So what are we going to talk about? And I mean, there were a lot of challenges with COVID, but that was actually a gift because it broke open a whole new way of talking about food. So I just love that. You mentioned Lynn Rossetto Kasper, and Catherine wants to know, are you still in touch with her? Does she listen to the show?
I'm in touch with her, but not as much as Sally, our managing producer, who was also our founding producer. She and Lynn were the two people who founded the show. They're dear, dear friends. They'll be friends for life. So yeah, we keep up with Lynn. We keep up with her artistic exploits. She's doing a lot of painting, a lot of sculpture. She's enjoying her retirement.
Oh, good for her. I can't wait to get to my painting era. I feel like when people retire, they pick up a paintbrush and suddenly, sure. I'm ready to get to my painting era. Okay, Janet wants to know, she was the longtime food writer for the Tampa Bay Times and cookbook author. And you probably get this question all the time. I can't think of anyone that you haven't had on the Splendid Table. So who's left? Could be living, dead. Who would you want to talk to about food?
Cardi B.
Ooh, I was not expecting that answer. Say more.
That's it. Just Cardi B. What else can you say?
But why?
She loves food. Yeah, I mean, I just love Cardi B. Megan Thee Stallion is also apparently really into food. If you've been following her Instagram, she bought a Popeyes. She's going to be a Popeyes owner. And apparently she got like a special permission to like have a full bar at her Popeyes.
Oh my gosh. I don't know who I thought you were going to say, but it was not Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. But I did see Cardi B on like a David Letterman Netflix special. Oh, that would be a blast. And she went to like a bodega and ordered like a chopped meat sandwich and stuff. That would be a blast. I want to talk a little bit about you. You mentioned that you're a cookbook editor, but let's go back to the beginning. Was there a moment or an experience when you realized that food would be central to your career?
I really fell into it, honestly. Truly, right place, right time, right era, dumb luck. I mean, basically, I had worked in restaurants and had worked in food service in a number of different ways while I was in college and, to pay the bills and really loved it. But after I graduated from college, I had a sort of a different career path. I was working in nonprofit organizations. I was working like in communities, and we were doing like affordable housing development and job skills training and stuff like that. But part of me just missed food, missed working with food, missed the camaraderie of food. Like that was a huge part of it. If you've ever worked in a restaurant, yes, I think in our media today, we see so much about how restaurants are like brutal places and their people are abused, both like by the letter of the law and just in larger ways that we don't really codify. And I think all that is true, but also what happens in restaurants is a lot of bonding. Maybe it's trauma bonding, but a lot of bonding,
I
a
had
lot of
some of that too.
camaraderie, a lot of love. A lot of love that people develop for one another when they work in restaurants. And so I missed that energy. And I thought, hey, maybe I do want to do something with food. And I went to culinary school. And while I was in school, I was like learning. I was so excited to be learning what I was learning. I started writing emails to friends and family about what I was learning. This is before blogging was like a mainstream thing. I'd never heard of blogs at this point. This is like in the early 2000s. People were becoming more interested, like in pop culture, mainstream culture, people becoming more interested in food, cooking, what chefs do, the whole thing. So I was writing these emails to friends and family, and they were getting forwarded around, and eventually they landed at the desk of an editor at a newspaper called the Financial Times. So I started writing for them, and it sort of snowballed from there. But that's how I became a writer. And I was a writer, like I said, for many years, and actually came on the Splendid Table because Sally had seen something I'd written about, literally about frying chicken skin. Like he was like that nerdy. And Lim was like, "Oh, let's talk about frying chicken skin." So I came on as a guest and came
Wow.
on, had a great time. They asked me on again a few times later, and next thing you know, here we are.
Wow. Okay, so you came at this from a food angle and then got more into the writing and the hosting. And this podcast kind of fell into my lap because I was more behind the scenes and I have more of a journalism background. So I felt like a little bit of fraud in terms of food knowledge. And my superpower is that I'm not afraid to ask a lot of questions. But
Yeah, I mean, that's what you gotta do.
did you feel like up to the job?
I am someone who, thankfully, at this point in my life, um, having been in this world, in the food media world for, I mean, geez, like almost 25 years, I thankfully don't have a lot of imposter syndrome anymore. But I think like a lot of people, I certainly did at all points in my career. And I think that you can feel imposter syndrome, that a lot of that is acculturated. A lot of that is sort of like taught to us,
Mm.
depending on how you were raised and who you are and what community you're from and all that stuff. But if you're in situations, you find yourself in situations where you have a mentor, you have someone who is at a further along stage of their career who trusts you and they show it, and you can learn to trust yourself. You know what I
Ooh.
mean? So Sally absolutely trusted me, showed her trust in me, and I began to trust myself. And that's always been the case with me as a writer. I had editors who showed their trust in me, and I could trust in myself because of that.
Oh, that's so
So
good.
I feel very strongly that, in our development as people, in our development as professionals, in our development in our careers, if we surround ourselves with, or just are lucky enough to find ourselves in situations where people who we respect show respect to us, we can learn to respect ourselves.
Oh,
If that doesn't come
you
naturally
need to give a TED
to
Talk.
some of
That's
us.
so good. That's so good. Yes. And it's like, well, if they think I can do it, then who am I to talk them out of it, you know? Okay, say more about the acculturation piece. Like, in what ways do you think your upbringing gave you the confidence to do what you're doing now? And then what were some of those things that you had to pick up from outside of your family?
Confidence is one thing, but I think that I do think about the fact that I'm Chinese American. My parents were immigrants. We were raised in a home where, in a somewhat classic stereotypical mold, like we didn't talk to each other a lot. And also there was a little bit of a cultural divide. Like I grew up in a place really different from where they grew up, But we always got together. We always had dinner every night together as a family. And conversation was not always easy. It was always like a lot of it was a very functional conversation. What did you do in school today? What did you get on that test? So on and so forth. But we would often talk about the food. And, we would be excited for like if we were gonna go visit family in Hong Kong, we'd be excited about what food we would eat. We would talk about that food, so that became sort of the basis for a lot of the conversation we had in the home was food. And so that's kind of hardwired into my brain, right? How do you learn to talk to people through food was a step that I had to learn how to take, but talking about food came very naturally.
Wow.
And I would say too, like I again very fortunate. Like when I was coming up as a writer early, like pretty early in my career, I was like taken under the wing. I was hired by Gourmet Magazine, which was an amazing 60-year magazine. Unfortunately, closed in 2009. But in the last, however many years of the magazine's existence, I was there. I was a staff writer for the magazine. And Ruth Reichel, who was the editor-in-chief at the time, legendary New York Times food critic and amazing, amazing writer and author of many books, became a dear friend and mentor. I was literally texting her this morning
Oh,
before I
wow.
got on with you. And an editor at the magazine named Doc Willoughby, who was the executive editor of the magazine, amazing editor, really taught me how to be myself on the page by basically like getting out of my way and helping me get
Ooh.
out of my own way.
How do you do
Um,
that? I think a lot of people struggle with that. In college, I was a writing tutor. That's what they called it at the library at my college. And
mhm.
people would come in with these
Yeah, yeah, sure,
papers
sure,
that
sure.
sounded very
I've done that.
formal.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people struggle with that, even in like a media format as well.
Hmm.
I know people are going, I want to sound like him. I want to sound as relaxed. I mean, you're talking to me right now, and you sound just like you do on the radio. So, how do you learn that?
I don't know. I mean, I think part of it is some of the confidence that you're talking about, right? Part of it's like just feeling like maybe what I have to say is worthwhile to you, maybe it's not, but I can share what I know how to share. Just to finish the point about my editor, Doc Willoughby. I had been edited prior to that point by, different editors as I wrote for different publications. And, some would be more engaged, some would be, less engaged, just depending on the job. But one time I had an edit that I wrote a 9-paragraph story and I never once spoke to the editor. Like he didn't email me, he didn't call me. I heard from the editor I normally work with, like a very high up senior editor would like to work on this piece. I was like, oh my God, what an honor. And I never saw or heard from the guy, never even saw an edit. Just next thing I know, one day it was in the paper. And he, as far as I can tell, he took the 9 paragraphs I wrote, took out the middle three, and just ran the story.
Wow.
And it shocked me because the middle three paragraphs of that story were to me like that was the whole point. And
Mm-hmm.
it totally changed what I was trying to say. And it freaked me out. And it really like bummed me out. And like like I was like, oh my God, now I have my name attached to this, and it totally makes a totally different point than what I was trying to say, yada, yada, yada. And so I was like really kind of gun shy about it, working with editors after that experience. You can't help it. I mean, that's how you get paid. But when I started writing for Gourmet, Doc Willoughby, he didn't touch my story. Like I
Ooh.
don't like. I mean, I'm not literally true, but like there was hardly any red on the when they returned the story, but he had filled up the margin of the page with questions.
Mm.
What is this doing here? Why are you trying to say this? What are you actually trying to say here? This description is great, but what does it actually get me as a reader? He just asked me questions over and over and over again. And it made me have to become a better writer because here wasn't someone that was like, let me make you sound like me. Let me make you sound like someone, like how I would write the story. It's how do you really want to write the story? What are you really trying to say here?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that exercise over and over and over again made me a better writer and it made me feel more confident in myself.
Oh, that's great.
Um,
Okay, you mentioned editors, and I know you've edited some cookbooks. The obvious question, would you ever write a cookbook, or can you think of a hole that needs to be filled in that space?
a cookbook, I don't really know that I have something to say culinarily that other people don't. So have I thought about it? Yeah. I mean, have I thought about it in a serious way? No, at least not at the moment. I love cooking and I wrote like recipes. I've written recipes for many years. I wrote a cooking column for the New York Times, the New York Times magazine for a number of years. And I love it, but I don't know that I have a cookbook in me, but I am working on a
Disagree.
book.
Oh, you are? Ooh, okay. All right. Well,
That's more of a narrative. It's not quite a memoir, but it's sort of exploring my relationship with Chinatown. So I live in New York City. Famously, New York City is a Chinatown. Somewhat less famously, there are actually like five Chinatowns in New York City. Like, I mean, there's like five neighborhoods where there are concentrations of Chinese communities. The most famous Chinatown being in Manhattan, like the most sort of historic one. And it's where my parents worked when they moved to this country. And, I pass underneath it every single day when I go to work. Sometimes I think it's very far away, if that makes sense. I mean,
mm-hmm.
it's just a few subway stops away, but sometimes I feel like the core, the culture, the place is too far away from my own comfort. And so I'm trying to learn how, just trying to like figure out what my relationship to Chinatown is and what my relationship to being, like, what does it mean for me to be a Chinese American? So these are a lot of questions I'm thinking about. I have a child and, we speak English at home. And so I think about that too. Like, does my language in my own family, does my language that I grew up with in my parents' home die with me? I don't want it to, but I don't know how to transfer it. And I think part of that means like I don't know what my identity is in the way that none of us truly know what our identity is, right? Like we always have room to grow and room to learn and room to explore. So, they say a really great book, you can get the point across in one sentence. And so it's taking me like 9 minutes to describe it. So I'm still honing it down, but we'll get there one day.
That's what the editor is for. Wow. Yeah. Having a kid just makes
Yeah.
you think about everything. What's going to die with me? The culture, the language, the recipes are a really good way to pass on a lot of that. Is there something you
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
at home that sort of puts you back in that world of when you were a kid? Maybe something you ate with your parents that you still eat or you've put your own spin on?
Yeah, I actually wrote about this. It was my last column for the New York Times Magazine that I wrote actually before I left that job to be on the Splendid Table. But there's this very, very, very classic home style Chinese dish. It's basically scrambled eggs with tomatoes, or because the Chinese will call it stir-fried eggs with tomatoes. And it's like everyone grows up with it. And it was sort of funny because it's such a core dish that it was so weird to me that I had never made it. Like, I'm a trained cook. I like went to culinary school, did pretty well there. I've worked in restaurants, and like one day I was like, God, I miss that dish. I have no idea how to make it. And yeah, I couldn't call my mom because my mom would just be like, I don't know, you just like make it. It's
Right.
like one of those things. It's almost like asking someone to like learn, like, how do you tie your shoes? It's like you
Sure.
just do it.
Yep.
So eventually I learned how to make the dish by Googling recipes and like sort of putting my own spin and whatever. So I make that at home a bunch. It also comes together in 20 minutes, delicious, and you have dinner on the table. It's super fast. But it's sort of a great metaphor too for this idea I'm talking about. Like, well, what is your culture? We all are proud of our cultures, right? But like, what is your culture and how connected are you to your culture? How do you feel connected to your culture? To me, maybe it's through cooking, maybe it's through language. But then when you start doing that, it's like, man, why are there things I don't know how to make? So it just
Mm.
gives you room, again, room to grow.
Yes. Oh, a few weeks ago, I spoke with Annabelle Tomatich. She's an author in Fort Myers, and she wrote a memoir called The Mango Tree. She was starting
Mm,
to write a cookbook because she's Filipino American. Ooh, you should have read The Splendid Table. But it morphed from a cookbook into a memoir because she realized I don't have any Filipino recipes. And then why don't I have any Filipino recipes? And then that turned
yeah,
into the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
memoir.
yeah.
And it was beautiful. Okay, before I let you go, I know you haven't spent much time in Florida. So when you come to the new Tampa Performing Arts Center on June
Mhm.
1st, what is a Florida food that you're looking forward to trying?
Well, I do think, speaking of mangoes, I do think mangoes are starting to come in at the very bottom, like down in like Homestead. So if I can get my hand on a local Florida mango, that would be amazing. And it's funny because Florida is such a unique place in the world. It's an amalgam of so many different cultures, like current cultures, current immigrants, like recent immigrants, obviously famously Cuban, the Cuban population, and I believe Ybor City is near Tampa, right?
Yep.
So like, and that's like a famous Cuban community. Like, so I'd love to explore that. I love Haitian food, and there are so many Haitians in South Florida. So I think of all these like Caribbean communities who are in Florida, but also like, North Florida is cattle country, right? It's a country unto itself.
It's
So
like the
I'm
South.
just excited to see, yeah, I'm just so excited to see like even a small glimpse of like what kind of surface I can scratch in a short time.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I feel like we scratched a lot of surface in a short time. This was so much fun. Thank you for your time. I cannot wait to see you on June 1st. I can't believe I'm one of your guests. That's wild. So
Yeah,
we're
I'm
going
so
to have a
excited for that. Thank you.
blast. Oh, of course. We're going to have a blast. And I hope you get Cardi. I would love nothing more than to be driving my daughter to volleyball practice in my minivan and you and Cardi B are on my radio.
Just chopping it up.
Yeah, let's manifest that, please.
If you know someone who knows someone, you let me know.
Okay, Cardi, call us, girl. Call Francis Lam. Okay, that would be fantastic.
Call us, girl.
Oh my gosh, this was a blast. Thank you, Francis.
Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
Francis Lam is a food writer, cookbook editor, and host of the public radio program, The Splendid Table. I cannot wait to get my hands on his recipe for Chinese stir-fried tomatoes and eggs, and I know you want to try it too. I mean, we all think we know how to make eggs, but this recipe has broken the internet, so we need to find out what he knows that we don't know. The recipe is on our website, thezestpodcast.com. I'm Dalia Colón. I produce The Zest with Andrew Lucas and Alexandria Ebron, who had the brilliant idea to invite Francis onto the show. So thank you, Alex. Thank you to my new friend, Francis Lam, and thank you to Splendid Table producers Sally Swift and Erica Romero. The Zest is a production of WUSF, copyright 2025, part of the NPR network.